Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Clifford Everly, the Exhibitions Associate here at Hicks Arts Center Gallery, where our current exhibition is Wonders Illustrated, a survey of 11 children's and YA book illustrators. Today we have Andie Munroe joining us from the Los Angeles area. I first met Andie at Otis College when I worked in the foundation department, and Andie was an undergraduate student in toy design. I remember Andie's friendly attitude, reliability, and willingness to share her experiences as a foundation student with first-year students, and while Andie was a classroom assistant for foundation faculty. So when I decided to curate Wonders Illustrated, I knew I wanted to ask Andie to participate after seeing her fun toy designs and story concepts. For Wonders Illustrated, Andie has shared her Oliver and Charlie plush render, which is over here, and also her line art for Charlie's home, which is over here. And then, I don't know if I can do this, but it's the 3D print is right there from Charlie's home. So it's very cool. And we actually have a 3D printer here on campus as well. And so I know students will be interested in seeing that. So I also wanted to tell you a little bit about Andie, what she's up to now, and she'll explain even more. But currently Andie is a toy designer at MGA Entertainment for the Little Tykes and Rescue Tales brand. Previously, she was a product developer for the Pokemon brand at Jazzwares. Throughout her career, Andie created a variety of product in both soft and hard goods, including mainline, seasonal, features, exclusives, and electronic items. She is passionate about designing with the intent to encourage people to explore their imagination, aiming to make products for people of all ages. Andie also has a background in child psychology and sustainability, both exceedingly valuable for designing toys. So I am very grateful and honored for Andie being here, and please take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Cliff, again for this entire opportunity. Honestly, it was super exciting to reconnect with you, as well as challenge myself to kind of work on this story a bit more and tie in some loose ends that would make a strong piece to be able to show in an exhibition. So again, I'm very, very grateful and excited to be here. So yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Andie Munroe. I am currently a toy designer, but I also like to say that I'm a storyteller and an illustrator, and more into this presentation, I'm going to dive in a bit more about how those are all kind of connected to each other and that it's not necessarily just one or the other. But I can go ahead and share my screen just because I had some background images to share. Oh no, I just got a new computer and I forgot that I need to give myself access. I'm so sorry. Give me 2 seconds. My apologies.
No problem.
Zoom. Oh shoot, it looks like, I'm so sorry. I should have done this when we did our pre-meet. It looks like I need to quit and reopen. Would you mind if we took a brief halter for like 1 minute while I get reconnected back in here? Okay, I'm so sorry. I will be back in 1 second.
No problem. Andie will be right back. So everyone please stay tuned and she'll join back in the room in a second. I think while she's doing that, I can give you all a quick tour of the exhibition if you're joining us from other areas. But right alongside Andie's work is this illustration by Floyd Cooper, who lives nearby nearby in Easton. Oh, there she is. Very good. And so we actually borrowed these from a museum nearby. And so, Andie, I was just showing them around for a second, but now I will sit down and give it back to you.
No worries. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Oh, can you possibly make me co-host again?
Oh, sure, yes. Where are you? Oops.
I appreciate the patience.
There there we go.
Awesome. Yes, it worked. Great. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so then just to recap again, I'm Andie Munroe. My current day job is as a toy designer, but I also am a storyteller and an illustrator. Below, you can find the link to my website if you are interested in checking out more of my work, as well as my social media if anyone would like to get connected in the future. So I figured I would start a little bit in my background and we could dive into my process with Oliver and Charlie next, and then maybe show a little bit of my personal work at the end. But in regards to my background, so I am an Otis College graduate. I graduated in 2020 with a BFA in toy design and a minor in sustainability. I actually wanted to note, especially for students that may be watching this, that I switched my major 4 times before I ended up settling in toy design. And I wanted to talk about that for a second because when I did this initial progression into where I am today, I thought that I was falling back in my progress as an artist because it took me so long to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. When in reality, I realized that everything that I switched into was somehow tied together. And what tied all of those together was storytelling. So I initially went out to Otis for photography. And then I realized pretty quickly that what I wanted to do as a photographer, primarily doing a lot of like documentation photography, was not necessarily structured around the classes at the school that I was going to. So I then decided that maybe I could go into graphic design because that could help support how I can lay out and tell my stories through my photographs. And then I was still not feeling like it was my strongest suit. I was still learning great things to put under my belt, but it was not what I was really wanting to do. So then I switched into animation and I did animation and filmmaking for about a year. Which is then when I started to decide or realize that there was something else missing that I wanted to be able to tie everything together, and that was product design, which is why then I ended up switching into toy design. And I sat there because it took me, I had to stay for an extra semester and I loaded my workload with classes to be able to catch up with the amount of majors that I switched into. But I then realized that storytelling was the key factor into every major that I went into. And so when I'm in toy design, having that story and having that meaning behind what I do makes a big difference to my work as well as how a consumer perceives it. And this is in regard to play pattern, or also like how something will really reach an audience. And this is also applied in film, it's applied in a poster, it's applied in a book. It's how do you accurately convey your concept and your story to a consumer. So that is where I'm at right now. I also have a minor in sustainability, and it's been really great to be in the industry right now and be tasked with figuring out how to make a product sustainable, specifically in mass production. It's really easy to be able to take a couple of pieces of material and make something sustainable, but how do you turn it into something that can be mass produced in regards to cost, into overconsumption, etc. So I'm at that part in my career right now where I'm figuring out what works and what doesn't work, but it's still something that I want to be able to carry with me through my career. My work experience. So I'm currently a product designer at MGA Entertainment. I design for the Little Tykes team, and I am lead designer on Rescue Tales and another brand that I unfortunately cannot share. I just started this job about a month ago, so it's been a really exciting new chapter that I get to figure out and work into. I am working heavily in preschool and early childhood education, which is a huge passion of mine. Previously, I was also at Jazzwares. I was a product designer on the Pokemon brand. I was making primarily plush items, but I also got the opportunity to work on some plastics. If you see in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm holding one of my favorite items that I've made. It's an 18-inch sleeping plush. I was lucky enough to develop the whole line. So I have about 8 or 9 18-inch sleeping plush on shelf that you can find at like Target and Walmart, GameStop. And I was there for about 3 years. So this was really the job that got me going in the industry. I started there as an intern my junior year, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity I had there. And then previously, just as Cliff talked about, I was also a teaching assistant at Otis before I ended up moving to Jazzwares. And I wanted to talk about that just for a brief second, especially for students that are watching this, specifically in the realm of people who have to work while they're in school to be able to pay the bills and to even just live where you are to go to school. So I was sitting there my like freshman year figuring out how I was gonna make my money for my rent and my food and not stray away from my education at the same time. And that's why I ended up doing teaching assistants, because I was able to go back and personally benefit, excuse me, my dog is snoring. It was able to benefit my own talent, because I was able to go back and redo the re-support the classes that I had taken prior and seen those missing pieces that I had missed before. But the biggest thing was I wanted to be able to support first-year students going into Otis that may have been in similar situations that I had been, where maybe they didn't have a lot of art experience, or they had no idea what they wanted to do, or they went out on their own and they're just trying to figure out who they are in general. So I ended up doing that, and I really enjoyed it. And then also, in order to make my living, I ended up TAing for about 8 classes a semester, 7 classes, if Cliff can remember. Yeah, I see your expression. So also every semester you take about 7, 8 classes. So it was a juggle, but it was more experience under my belt. Yeah, so that was my like first career, or my first job at Otis when I moved to LA. And then I was lucky enough to get my internship at Jazzwares. In regards to my skills that I do now, I could not draw for the life of me before going to Otis, but now character design is one of my strongest suits. I also am proficient in concept development, and that's pretty widespread in regards to like concepting a toy or concepting a show, like what I just worked on with Cliff, just overall ideations. I also am proficient in hard goods and soft goods, which can range from plastic to plush to wood making, etc. And then 3D modeling, which I will show when we go into the Oliver and Charlie exhibition. And that's how I was able to create my 3D print. And then lastly, some hobbies, passionate about sustainability, photography, traveling, working with NGOs, volunteering, sketching, etc. And then lastly, I have a 14-year-old pug that's pictured up there. Just she's also a big hobby of mine. So I wanted to talk more about Oliver and Charlie, which is the exhibition that is being shown for Cliff. So this is an unfinished piece of work, but again, just to reiterate, it was really nice to be able to get this opportunity, because it made me sit down and figure out how to tie those missing pieces together and to not have an open-ended story. So without reading the entire essay or story to you, the general brief is that Charlie is one of the sweetest cubs you'll ever meet. He's very kind-hearted, outgoing, just a very happy guy overall. And he's very family oriented until one day there's an instance that causes Charlie to be able to, or to have to leave his hometown and find civilization somewhere else. So he ends up finding the city called Sansi, which is a little bit of a city mixed with a forest, where he's then tasked with needing to come up with a new home in hopes that his family will return one day. But of course, being the sweet, kind-hearted bear that Charlie is, the little goofy bear, his first priority is finding food. So he ends up wandering around the streets, and he runs into this restaurant where he just nonchalantly walks into the kitchen and starts bearing into every kind of food that he can find. And long story short, the people there think that he's the new head chef and end up putting him to work. So without knowing, Charlie all of a sudden has a job at this pizzeria where he gets to sit down and make pizzas for fun, but he doesn't know it's a job. He thinks he's just getting to make art and eat the food that he makes. Until one day, Oliver, the little duckling that you see next to him, sees that something's off and something's not right with this new hire who's supposed to be the head chef. So he ends up following him home one day, where he ends up seeing really what Charlie's life is and who he is. And so this whole story, I wanted to have this aspect of like non-blood related family, and how this fact that these two people were able to come together and to form their own sense of brotherhood moving forward. And this is something that I also was keeping open-ended because I don't want it just to be a one and done storybook. I would like it to be something that I have extra continuations moving forward of, like, maybe there's a new adventure they go on. I just don't want the story to end with one. So the cool thing about, I guess I should have led this up for switching the slide. The nice thing about Charlie is Charlie needed to find a home. So what he ended up doing was he found a bunch of cardboard boxes outside of his work one day and went to the forest and created his little cardboard home. But you can see that this home is not necessarily a run me down little cardboard home where he took a box and just started sleeping in it. He ended up making it something of his own. So he ends up putting tapestry up, string lights. He takes little markers and draws for extra effect. You can see up in the top, he has a little reading nook where he'll go in every night and read some of his favorite books. You can't forget the closet that holds his work uniforms at the end of the day, as well as his toy closet. So he's really made it something that is his own and that he's at peace with. And I like to say that Charlie is about, he's very young at heart. So I wouldn't necessarily put an age to it, but this is something that makes him extremely happy. He comes home and he's 100% satisfied. And so this is what I ended up modeling for the exhibition. I wish I had brought up 3D models to show what it was before, but with a 3D printer, especially with students who may be looking at this and want to get into 3D printing, there's a lot of slicing and chopping things up that you have to do in order for a 3D print to work efficiently, or else you end up having like icicles falling from certain parts of the model. So this was my first time officially 3D printing something. So it was a lot of late nights and a lot of trial and error and sitting there and watching a 9-hour print go to realize that it was completely messed up and you needed to sit down and do it again. But it was really great to be able to take a story and 3D model it. And that's also what I wanted to talk about was when you're creating a story, especially if it's something that you want to have a product tied to, it was really challenging to come up with a story and think about how I could design it so it could work efficiently in a product if I chose to do that in the future. And that's not necessarily what every artist or every person would like to do, is to create a product from a story. But if that's something that you want to do, it made me quickly realize when I was designing how important that was in the preliminary development of it. I think I've redrawn Charlie and Oliver maybe 4 or 5 different times to be able to get that 3D look to them. Because once you start doing turnarounds and you start realizing what the product is going to look like in a 360, you realize that proportionally some things may not work out. Like, for example, like when coming up with this, at first I had very extruded and very elongated parts that weren't piecing together. But when you looked at the illustration, like, for example, this little wooden piece up here, I was like, oh, it goes into the house. It's fine. Like, it doesn't need that final touch up. But then I realized when I was 3D printing was how is that actually going to support the roof that I designed? It's a lot of problem solving. But yeah, so then basically one day Oliver follows Charlie home and sees that this is a situation that that Charlie is living in. And one day Oliver decides to show Charlie where he's been living. And it turns out that Oliver has been in the same situation that Charlie is, where he lives on his own and he had to make his own little home. So Oliver lives in a little cute shoebox underneath the dock. And the long story short of the story is that they end up combining their homes together. So Charlie lives in the cardboard home and Oliver lives in the little pond on the lake right next to his home. I ended up doing some quick value studies just to get some story understanding. So the first one that you see is Charlie walking down the street as he's in the city for the first time. He's moved to the big city, ready to find like food, and he's living his best life. And then the second picture that you see is when Charlie and Oliver are finally united and they're on this little log path back to their home. They're now happy, they're brothers, very connected. And then the third image that you see on the right is Charlie at night when he's living by himself, reading one of his favorite books, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, in his little reading nook. So I just wanted to share some of the preliminary ideations that I have done for this story. It took me a while to be able to come up with the final designs, which were this one here and this duckling up here. And I really want to stress, especially to younger students or children who are watching this, that you don't have to come up with the best idea the first time you do it. You could do 50 different ideations and only be satisfied with the last one that you've done. It was very stressful in the beginning trying to come up with it, but I like where it ended up now. And then I also just lastly wanted to share. So I had the plush renders that are shown in the gallery are more beauty shots, which are the fancier kind of put together images. But I wanted to do a more realistic plush ideation to show what it would look like if I had actually sewn them and turn them into plush. So you can see the very the seam lines where I would try to construct or cut the pieces, where I would sew them. How the thing would balance, where joints would connect to each other, etc. So yeah, I think that was it for my Charlie and Oliver quick recap. I am currently trying to turn it into a storybook. I have an essay, which I'm not sure if it's being shown in the gallery, but I have a written story down, but now I'm in the process of trying to figure out how to illustrate it and turn it into a storybook. So I'm not sure if you want to do questions on Charlie and Oliver before I move on. I figured that it would just be a good time to show some of my own personal work and how story relates to that. But since we're a little bit of a small group in the chat, if anyone has any questions in regards to Charlie and Oliver, if they wanted to bring it up now, it's fine. Zoom. I am not sure how to access the main screen again. Back to meeting. Oh my goodness. I don't know how to access the chat. So Cliff, if you can, oh, full screen. There it goes. Oh, no, it did not.
Yeah, I didn't see any questions in the chat. So
great. Okay, I'll just have you dictate it for me then. Great. So then I just wanted to then just go through some of my personal work on my website. Let's start with Pokemon. Just from my, I just wanted to share some work that I did on my career at Pokemon. So some of the figures that I did, I got to work on some vinyl figures, as well as some highly articulated figures. And this is what I was going back to in regards to story and ideation. Is it's really important when you're trying to concept something into 3D, but you only have a 2D aspect, on really figuring out preliminary how joints and how features actually connect to one another. Which has been why I've been really grateful to have the job that I do, because then I actually get these physical samples and I see why things work the way that they do. And it's been a lot of trial and error and a very big learning experience. And then I also have experience in 2-inch figures, non-articulated. This is just a process of telling our Hong Kong engineers, hey, here's a turnaround of Pikachu. This is what I would like it to look like. And then they would end up sending me 3D models of the turnaround. And I would do these things called red lines, like overlays, and say, hi there, Pikachu's face is too flat. Please round it out to look like this, or increase the ears by 10%. So that's typically how the baseline of development for simple toys works when you're working with Hong Kong. And then my plush experience is just what I was talking about a bit before. This is my 18-inch sleeping plush line that I was able to develop. I had a focus in younger children as a consumer age, but also I've heard from my mother and my family and my friends that has made a wonderful pillow to everyone. So regardless of what age you are, I think it's a good hit. But when I was developing this, I had the purpose of that security blanket of a toy, and how a child would want to take this with them where they went. I ended up reading reviews on Amazon about how some people may have lost a family member, or they had a child that was grumpy, and that this pillow was really something that like the child carried with them or used as their security blanket, which was exactly what I was going for. I think that when you're creating a toy, it's really important to think about the material and the feel as well as the story behind it. So this sleeping plush has a very velvety, soft texture to it, as well as soft stuffing that really serves for a nice pillow. And then also I was able to work on some collector 8-inch plush, which was also a main project of mine. Yeah, I was very grateful. I've been a huge lifelong fan of Pokemon, so it was really cool to be able to bring that back as my first job in my career. Okay, let me dive into something that's more story-esque. Let me do Little Helpers. So Little Helpers, this is a really good example of how story ties into product, but this was an action figure line that I worked on. This is not actually on shelves or anything. This was just an ideation that I did in college, where we were tasked to come up with an action figure line. Excuse me. So what I ended up coming up with were, they're called the Little Helpers, and their slogan is sharing happiness. So the whole aspect of this is a group of sisters, and they're all about serving the community. They travel around in their little community bus, and they work with whatever tasks or community service that they can. So Rose is the very sustainable focused girl. She loves going on hikes. She loves going and picking weeds. She likes finding endangered animals. She's all about helping the environment and preserving it. Which also was really great when it came into model making and prototyping, because then I had to come up with certain accessories that really served the story behind what I wanted to do. Like, it wouldn't make sense for Rose to carry around a paintbrush if I knew that she was an adventurer and she was an outdoor wilderness person, or I didn't want her to have very fancy things if you knew that she was the one who was getting her hands dirty. And then additionally, I also 3D modeled her and had to work with joints. So it also had to do multiple iterations of my characters when it came to joints, because especially on a 3D printer, when you have a piece of a joint that's maybe an eighth of an inch, it's going to be tiny and it may not print correctly. So it was a lot of trial and error. And then you have Riley, who's the artistic one. She ends up going to community centers and she puts on classes for children, for adults. She just wants to be able to spread art around the community, as well as Reese, who's the youngest at 5 years old, and she just wants to be able to perform and entertain. So her primary job is she goes to senior centers and puts on shows for the elderly. That's why I wanted to stress that story is very important behind the product that you do, because I feel like I could have just put out these 3 girls and been like, oh, they're sisters and they work in the community together. But it really takes that story that makes it deeper and makes you see the perspective of the story behind the toy, pretty much. And then Chosen Hearts is a good one as well. This was also an action figure line that I came up with. And basically it takes place in the world of Crystal Hollow, which is a land of living stuffed animals. And this world was created through the sacred magical hearts, which is my logo. So our main character is Tip the monkey, who is a stuffed animal. And I just wanted to point out that I came up with this monkey idea because I had my little brother at the time carried around this monkey named Tip, and he refused to let it go, and it was everything to him. So I thought, why not make a toy out of it? So Tip is the protagonist who ends up getting his heart ripped out by Donatella, who is the soulless stuffed animal. And basically he only has so much time to restore his heart and to get his gem back before he turns into a soulless stuffed animal as well. So him and his friends, who all have their own little magical powers, end up going on this journey to go find his magical heart and to restore his soul. So you have Bo, who's his best friend. I also designed toy articulation behind it too. So his feature would be like ram action. So you'd push the tail down and the head would go down and he would headbutt his way through trouble. And then you have Elle, who's the magical serpent, and her gem is on her forehead so she can fly. I also designed it where there's a joint in the back of the body that you push down and the legs come out. So you could really resemble a flying mode when you play with it as a consumer. And then there's Charlie and May, who are the little supporting characters. And what their features are is that their hearts glow whenever they're near a missing heart. So the feature behind that is that there's this thing called reed switches that you can put in between, put in each character that will cause the figures to glow once they're near each other. Yeah, this is actually something that I want to make actual product out of someday. I just haven't had the time yet. And then I added a beauty shot of the big fight with Tip and Donatella at the end of it. So yeah. Additionally, I just wanted to share some sketches that I do. Sketching is a huge passion of mine. When I came to Otis, I knew nothing about drawing. I came out for photography. I could draw when I was younger, but it was not up to an artistic or a professional level whatsoever. And then somehow that's now what I do for my career. But I primarily draw on my iPad just for reference. I love physical sketching as well, but I think with Procreate and the new iPad, it's been really easy for me to be able to reflect that digitally. So I like to do a lot of sketchbooks. I like going to zoos or aquariums and just sitting down and drawing whatever I see. And then also some character design that I've done before. And I think story is a really big reason why I like to do character design is like, there's one thing about building up the skill and figuring out how to draw a human or how to draw a character, but I've started to really sit down and come up with these accessories and these character designs that really dive into a deeper story that I then may want to use in the future, or it just helps train my brain a bit to get that deeper level of storytelling. So yeah. I guess additionally, just to give reference from the other things that I do for 3D modeling, I ended up coming up with this Futurama train set where I had the carts be Futurama characters. This is a good example of having to make sure that your design is very 3D oriented, because you end up doing these things called turnarounds when it comes to model making. So whether you or a sculptor or Hong Kong is working on this, they can see and get all of the information that they can, which then leads to getting 3D models. And this is exactly what I did for the Oliver and Charlie 3D model. Is I started off with 3D turnarounds, and then it helps when you go into modeling, because then you can just take a block of clay over your orthographic turns, and you can just start modeling to shape it when it's in correct proportion. So then I ended up coming up with the actual buildings from what I drew. And then from there, you can either 3D print it, or you can decide to render it in a rendering software. So this was not physically created. This was just using a rendering system. So yeah, let me see if there's another one I can share. I guess a cool one to share. I helped design our Otis College's school mascot, and this was the first thing that I ever worked on in a more mass production aspect. And this was actually a really great experience, being that I had no idea what needed to be communicated to our Hong Kong manufacturers. So it really played a huge part in communication, which I also think is tied into storytelling, is how do you create a product, or how do you create an image or a piece of work that really communicates what you're trying to convey or what the consumer is trying to convey. So it was really quick for me to catch on that I needed to get as much information in my designs or in my story or in my piece of work as possible to be able to show what I was talking about. So, and honestly, this is what got me into plush design and why I did plush for 3 years. Yeah. Share one last one. This was a story project that I worked on in school as well that I haven't finished. It was just some quick ideations, but the whole tagline was it was a young girl that gets lost in the forest to soon discover that she was summoned by a spirit as the chosen one to restore nature's pure beauty to what it once was. So I ended up starting off with storyboards on what maybe some key elements would be. And so you've got your girl who's ready to go off into the forest and discover her, that she was the chosen one, etc. I haven't finished this full story, but it was really important to get those storyboards blocked out to see what kind of information I needed to add in there. And the value study, whenever you're doing your rendering, it helps understand what depth is, as well as color blocking. So yeah, just a little story that I did. Honestly, I think that's pretty much it in some of my key components. I feel like I may have gone through that a little fast. So if there's anything that anyone wants me to just talk about more or show, please feel free.
There was a question in the chat.
I see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you always write stories, and did you take many writing classes in college? So I always, you know what, when I was thinking about as a child, I really did like to write stories. I used to have my composition book, and I remember a couple of weird little stories that I would just write into there at night by myself. But I never really had a strong aspect of writing stories like word for word. I think I realized, oh, thank you. I think I realized, that I was pretty proficient in storytelling when I was actually making my products and realizing that I had story hidden underneath the product that I didn't realize all along. Like, it came as a supporting aspect to my product, but now I'm at the stage where I'm starting to finally like pull it out and to really make it its own and to embrace it. So yeah. If that answered your question. But I'd always wanted to do take storytelling classes because initially I wanted to be a conservation photographer for National Geographic. So I wanted to get into that journalism and documentation, and that is still kind of what I want to go into. I'm at this point in my life where I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to take every single aspect of what I enjoy doing and tying it all together into one big bundle. So I think I may actually take some writing classes in the future, or something that'll help support my documentation passion. But yeah. Yeah, that was pretty much it for me. I hope that there's anything, like, again, if there's anything that you want me to talk about further, please feel free. I just figured I would share my experience and what I've gone through and what I thought was most important to me in my career. So
Yeah, that was very helpful and eye-opening to like to hear your trajectory of going from college, well, from even before college with your goals, and then changing majors, and then figuring out toy design was where you wanted to be for now, at least. And I wanted to ask about like your interest in preschool. We have an early learning center here on campus, and so I always love when they come over because the kids they're usually pre-K, so they have this very curious nature to them, and I love it when and for this exhibition in particular, like trying to match the book to the illustration, or and seeing the environment that you created. So I was just wondering if you could just maybe talk about like how it translates, like preschool, like and the study of child psychology, like how that then gets sort of translated into a toy, and like how much of that is sort of talked about in production.
yeah, absolutely. And that's actually great that you asked that, because I'm having these challenges right now at my new job at MGA, because it's very centered around young children and how do we convey that. And I feel like there's one of two ways. You're either very blunt about it and you're like, this is going to help you learn. It's going to make you learn the ABCs. It's going to teach you how to paint. It's going to teach you how to nurture. But then it also comes, and I think in a more subconscious way, where you're like, I want to have this 4-year-old child work on their creative skills. I want them to strengthen their imagination. So I feel like there's one of two routes that you can take. Typically, it's a lot of it is like going, for example, on the more straightforward way. Like if you're doing one of those those toys that have the holes with the different shapes and you put the blocks in there. A lot of that when it comes into production is we do a lot of child testing to make sure that that is something that a child is very interested in, and B, it's something that's actually going to help spark their creativity or help support certain parts of their education or their development. A huge thing for me is having a lot of support toys for younger children. I think it's important, especially with nowadays, different kind of situations with each child growing up. I think it's important to have toys that really have a support system for them. It's just, I think, I'm trying to think about this. But I don't know. I think there's also something in terms of like the subconscious way where you want kids to really strengthen their cognitive skills when it comes to play. Play is so important from the ages of 1 to 6 in just developing natural skills that that's what I'm kind of focusing on right now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, oh yeah, I saw Deborah asked a question. Have you thought about working with educational toys? That's actually what I do right now. I'm working on the Little Tykes team, which is, if you remember, they're the cars that have the big eyes, a couple of, they do like some of the bigger sets, but now we're diving into more educational toys. So right now, we're working with electronic toys. We're doing, like Rescue Tales, for example, is a preschool line that I'm working on. And it is, it's centered around pets that you can adopt and rescue. And from there, you nurture them back to health. So a child can sit there and figure out what it is that they can do to help make their friend, sorry, there's a siren, to help make their friend feel better, to have that sense of comfort, that sense of family, or to even just learn why things are the way they are. Like, oh, if I put a Band-Aid on it, it's going to make the boo-boo feel better. Yeah, developing their thinking skills, exactly. Problem solving, cognitive skills, everything. Yeah.
And just, I have one other question. When you, like in the work environment, how does it feel now? Like, do you work more in groups, or like in college? I'm not sure how it was, like if you were working more on as like a solo person, or like you had more of a group working together on different projects, or how did that work out?
That's a good question. No, exactly. Because I'll talk about the progression of it, because in college was a group effort, but everyone worked pretty solo, because the whole like art school was building up your personal portfolio and building up your own skills to be able to land that job in the industry and say, this is what I can do. And also having some team projects to show like, this is how I work well in teams. But then when I moved to Pokemon, especially being on such a high and strict brand, there was a lot of hierarchy in regards to the processes and the teamwork that needed to go into it. So my job was creating these packs that I would send to Hong Kong to be able to start a project. And then I would work on the development as it went through. But also with that, I'm working with the brand team to say, hey, does this work strongly with the Pokemon brand as well as the actual Pokemon company, and making sure that their needs are met, even though it might not be something that I would want to do. It's a lot about collaboration and taking people's opinions and being able to find something that works for everyone, as well as the overall play pattern. But now, being that I'm a lead designer on the Rescue Tales and just overall Little Tykes team, it's a different experience, because now I've reached a level where I'm not at the bottom of the chain making sure that I'm doing what everyone wants me to do. It's, hey, this is what I want to do. How can you, how I need you to help me with this. What do you think? How can I make this better? I'm directing it a lot now, which is great. But there's always a sense of teamwork, I think, that has to go into the industry. I think any business that you run, because unless you're a one-man show and you're like everything is under, I think working in a team is very, very important. Because there's also things that I don't know. And so I think it's a learning experience at every company I go to, because I work with all these amazing people that do things that I don't know how to do. So I understand why things work the way that they work outside of my own work bubble. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to know that that's how it works. 'Cause I feel like sometimes in some industries or in some jobs, it's more like you do a lot of back work or work in the background, and then you're on your own, and then it suddenly appears, and then in my case, putting on the doing exhibitions, it's like there's a lot of back work, and then it all of a sudden it happens, and
yeah,
so it's pretty interesting.
And it doesn't hit you until you see it up there and you're like, wow, I just spent a year working on this. Oh yeah, and also to mention in like mass production too, working with our international manufacturers, or if you end up manufacturing domestically as well, is really important, because if I have this idea for a toy that I end up taking to Hong Kong and they're like, oh, there's a limitation, either it's a choking hazard or we can't mold this the way that it is, then you have to be able to work with your international teams and be like, okay, well, even though I have this idea that's really great, there's physical limitations as to why I can't make this. So it's a lot of problem solving with engineers, and it's something that's really great. Being able to work on a team is that I don't need to know all the answers necessarily. It's being able to utilize and take like everyone else's opinions and everyone else's knowledge and be able to make this combined product together. But
does anyone else have any other questions for Andie today? Thank you. I really like the logo that you created for them. I know that was something you were like working on and sort of working out.
For Charlie and Oliver.
Yeah.
So actually, I have to mention too, that's also a great thing about working on the team, because my graphic skills are not great, but my partner is very proficient in graphic design. So we had to work in a team together to be able to come up with the logo. But there are certain elements to getting to this logo that I wouldn't have never even thought of without having someone who focused on that better than I did. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I think that especially that typeface, there was, I think in the 70s or 80s, a story just called Oliver, or maybe on Broadway. And I think that may be a similar.
Really?
I think so. Or a book, or I think a movie, they may have used a similar font or type.
That could either work to my advantage or my disadvantage.
Right, I think it works. It's because it like has that sort of nostalgic quality to it, but then also what was I going to say? And like also has like kind of a restaurant, you know, with the hat and everything.
Yeah. Exactly. So when we came up with this, and I wish I had the thumbnails to show, but we came up with a couple of different options of what their strongest suits being their duo that they were. Was it working at the restaurant together? Was it living in nature together? Was it the fact that they're just a duck and the bear and they're two animals and we just put the paw prints on there? Which is why we ended up coming up with the hat in the rolling pin, because we figured that that was the biggest component to how they were connected together and something that will keep continuously growing through the story. So yeah.
All right. One second. I was just messaging someone in the chat. Because we did change the time. Okay. Well, I wanted to thank you for agreeing to be in the show and to also agree to do an artist talk. And I know that so many people will benefit from it. I think not only here, you know, but oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention lastly was that I'm thankful that you mentioned talking about working while in school, because one thing I've learned here is figuring out like timing of things and that are in person. When we do in-person things like an opening reception, like there's a tendency, you know, people don't always stick around on campus afterward because they have to go work. And so that's a realization that I came to being here, but just in general, I think we have to be really cognizant of like how stressed people are, or what they have to do beyond their schoolwork. So.
Absolutely. And it took a lot of conversations at the time in college, because I wish I was in a position where I could just focus on my education solely, but it's different. I feel like there was this perception in school that every class like was the only class that you were taking, was the only focus. And at the end of the day, if you have a salary job and you're making money outside of work and that's your only job, then yes, there's that level of expectation, especially if it's enough to live off of, to be able to be there 150% of the time. But especially in that college age where everyone's a little bit fragile and figuring things out, it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of conversations. But I was very grateful for the support, especially like you, Cliff, because I don't think it was technically possible for me to work as many TA jobs as I did, but I needed it and I appreciated it. And it was really great. Like, I loved being able to work on campus as well, because it helped grow my connections with the people that I know today. So
yeah, that's super important. I mean, even not being at Otis anymore, obviously, I feel like I made so many contacts there, and like you, and people that I can reach out to now. So
yeah. And for people, like for students watching, like you don't realize the connections in school or where you're working at the time until you're on to the next thing. And you're like, oh my God, I remember that this person was a really great character designer. I remember this person was really good at graphic design or coming up with stories. Maybe they'd love to help me with this concept. And you don't realize it until you're out of it and you're ready to rekindle those connections. But
yeah, definitely. Well, it's been a pleasure seeing your presentation, a pleasure to chat with you and see what you're up to now. So if no one else has any other questions, I think I will end the talk. And again, if you want to email me for the recording or any of the recordings, we did 6 of them. Yes, 7 actually. There was one on Saturday a while back. So I'm in the process of uploading them and editing them. So if anyone would like to watch one in the future, please email me at clifford.eberly@otis.edu. So everyone have a great evening. It was nice to see you all in Zoom land.